It is October 17th, and we are hearing a lot of talk about teams tanking for the first and the second pick with the chance to land Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson. But I did some research, and very rarely do the top two picks in any draft class together combine for successful NBA careers. Stay tuned as I will go over some of the best and the worst top two picks since 1990. Good morning, and shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I am your host, Rafael Barlowe, the director of scouting for NBA Big Board and the founder of NBA Draft Junkies. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm representing the G League Ignite today. All right, let's just get right into it. So I did a little bit of research, and according to the numbers and the history, the chances of the top two picks combined in any draft class being successful, being multi-time all-stars or franchise players, very slim. So does that make you a little bit hesitant about Scoot and Wembanyama? And honestly, it's unfair to them because they shouldn't be compared to the guys from previous drafts. But if you go back and just look at some of the drafts, you will see that the number two pick is kind of like a curse in a sense. The number two pick hasn't been as successful as the number one pick, but there are some guys that were selected second overall that didn't even have average NBA careers. And honestly, when I look back, I'd say the best class as far as having the best number one and number two pick was 1992, and that was Shaquille O'Neal and Alonzo Mourning. Shaq was 15 All-Stars, 14 All-NBA selections, while Zoe was 7 All-Star teams, 2 All-NBA selections. Other than that, it's going to be very difficult to find two guys that were selected 1 and 2 that went to at least 3 or 4 All-Star games combined, which is saying a lot considering that if you're taking a guy number 1 and number 2, you are expecting them to be a franchise player. All right, so let's just get right into it. All right, so let's go with 1990. And this is around the time when I first really got interested in the draft. Derek Coleman and Gary Payton were the first two selections. I'm old enough to remember Derek Coleman was this super talented forward who I think his game is now more suited for the modern NBA. He could shoot, he could pass, he could handle. Super skilled. He was the first pick. I mean, he was definitely the best player in college basketball that year. But he only made 2 All-Star teams and 1 All-NBA selection. Now, talent was never his issue. He had some problems with his weight. Some people just say he's one of these guys that probably just did not, or I shouldn't say probably, in my opinion, just did not maximize his gifts. But Gary Payton, 9 NBA All-Stars, 9-time All-NBA. So when you combine that class, it's actually one of the best. So, I mean, that's letting you know where we're going in this episode. But now, I also decided to add a category in a redraft. Who would replace one of the players that did not succeed, or who was the best player or second best player in that draft? And so Gary Payton, if you do that draft all over again, Gary Payton was the best player in that draft, and he went number 2. So that's not bad. So you go to 1991, Larry Johnson and Kenny Anderson. Now, Kenny Anderson is someone that really kind of changed my life. I thought I was going to be the next Kenny Anderson. I'm left-handed. He was left-handed. He was an absolute star in college, and I had no doubt in my mind as a young kid that Kenny Anderson was going to be one of the greatest players ever. And unfortunately, when you look at Larry Johnson and Kenny Anderson combined, they combined for 3 All-Stars and 1 All-NBA appearance. Now, in that class, you could say in a redraft, you would take Dikembe Mutombo, number 1. And before I get into that, prayers up to Dikembe Mutombo and his family. It came out this weekend that he is getting treatment for a brain tumor. And I've never met Mutombo, but I've heard nothing but great things about him as far as just him giving back to his country and building hospitals. I mean, just a disappointing story to hear this weekend, but my prayers are with Mutombo and his family at this time. But back to the 91 class. In a redraft, you may say Dikembe Mutombo and Steve Smith would go 1 and 2 in a redraft if you could do it all over again. Then we talked about 92, Shaq and Mourning. Those were the top 2 picks. But Shaq and Mourning has been by far the most successful top 2 picks in a class. In a redraft, someone who's maybe deciding to nitpick may say that they would take Latrell Sprewell over Alonzo Mourning. I don't think that would happen, but that is the only person in that class that actually comes close to being in consideration to replace one of the top 2 players, and you know it's not going to be Shaq. And this is where it gets a little tricky, right? 1993, Chris Webber was the first pick in that draft. He was just a stud out of Michigan. His first 2 years, went to the Final Four, kind of changed college basketball along with the Fab Five from the big shorts to the socks. Chris Webber was an absolute college basketball legend. And throughout his career, even though it was kind of limited due to injuries and his prime wasn't as long as I would have hoped it would be, he still finished with 5 All-Star appearances, and he was All-NBA 5 times. Now, the second pick was Sean Bradley. Sean Bradley did not make a single All-Star team, or, of course, he was not All-NBA. But in a redraft, you can say Webber, Penny would go 1-2, maybe Webber, Mashburn, maybe Webber, even Vin Baker, because Penny, Mashburn, and Vin Baker had much, much better careers than Sean Bradley. All right, in 1994, there was Glenn Big Dog Robinson, who absolutely deserved to be the first pick in that draft. Big Dog was a dominant college player. I mean, he was like an old man in college. He had the same old man game in college that he had in the NBA. And Glenn is someone that I feel like he's underrated. He made 2 All-Star appearances, which some may say that's a disappointment for a top 10 pick. And it just seemed like he never reached the heights that I thought he would reach. And some may feel that he was kind of penalized by the NBA because he's responsible for, I guess, the rookie scale contract. If I'm not mistaken, he asked for like $68 million right out of college, and it just ended up being like this big deal. And he seemed like he was kind of penalized for it by the media. His game didn't have a lot of flash and flair to it, which may have hurt him, but only 2 All-Star appearances. Now, the second pick was Jason Kidd. There's no doubt. Kidd is a Hall of Famer. He's currently the coach of the Dallas Mavericks. Kidd went to 10 All-Star appearances, or had 10 All-Star appearances, made All-NBA 10 times, won an NBA championship, gold medal. Jason Kidd is he's a Hall of Famer. We know he's a Hall of Famer. But in a redraft, you may take Kidd number 1 or Grant Hill number 2. And Grant Hill finished with 7 All-Star appearances, made All-NBA 5 times, despite his career being really, really cut short due to like that just disgusting ankle injury that he suffered from continuing to play in the playoffs when he was hurt. And depending on how you see it, you may take Hill number 1, you may take Kidd number 2, but just based off of their career and their numbers, there's no doubt that Grant Hill had a much better career than Glenn Robinson. Now, 1995. Now, this was one of my favorite classes because one of my all-time favorite players is Rasheed Wallace. And that year, I just thought Rasheed should have been the number 1 pick. I thought he was better than Joe Johnson. And I'm not one of these people that's just saying like, oh, I knew I was right. But no, to me, there was no doubt that Rasheed Wallace was a much better player than Joe Smith at Maryland. But in reality, if Tim Duncan decided he wanted to come out that year, he would have been the top pick. But he decided to stay in school. And the top 2 picks in the 1995 NBA draft were Joe Smith and Antonio McDyess. They combined for 1 All-Star appearance. Joe Smith didn't make any. Joe Smith was never All-NBA. McDyess made 1 All-Star team, and he was All-NBA 1 time in his career. Now, when you do a redo in the 1995 draft, there's no doubt about it, Kevin Garnett will be the top pick. 15 All-Star appearances. He made All-NBA 7 times. He won MVP. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. Kevin Garnett is a legend and actually kind of changed basketball in a sense, in an era, because he was the first, not the first ever, but he was the first in a long time to go from high school to the NBA, and it kind of opened the floodgates of guys going straight from high school to the league, and his success made people follow, and which the NBA eventually didn't like. But Kevin Garnett would be the first pick. And now with the second pick, In a redraft from 1995, you may go Rasheed Wallace, 4 All-Star appearances, won an NBA title. You may go with Jerry Stackhouse, if I'm not mistaken. Stackhouse won a scoring title. And then Michael Finley, who was selected in the late first round, ended up having 2 All-Star appearances and having a pretty nice career. But it's just a no-brainer. Kevin Garnett would go number 1, and then I would say Sheed number 2. But 1995 was it was a class. It was one of the first classes where there were a lot of underclassmen that were entering the NBA. It was like when the draft started getting younger. But Joe Smith and Antonio McDyess, 1 All-Star appearance. That is pretty scary. So one of the worst classes as far as top picks ever. All right, I have a lot more classes to get into, but let's talk about Rocket Money because I have a question to ask you. Are you wasting money on subscriptions? Because 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about. Maybe for you, it's an unused Amazon Prime account, which is not the case for me, or a Hulu account that never gets streamed. There's this great app that I use that helps me track all of my expenses, and because of it, I no longer waste money on subscriptions that I do not use. You may have heard of it. It's called Rocket Money, but it was formerly known as Truebill. Now, I give you a personal story. I was living overseas last year, and when I was living overseas, I needed to have this ESPN Player app in order to stream some of the games, and it was like $11 a month. I totally forgot about it. When I signed up for Truebill, I realized that I was spending $11 a month on this app that I no longer need because I'm not overseas. Shout out to Truebill because that $11 saved me a little bit of money, gave me an extra meal. I got a thing for cookies, so I was able to save that money and buy a little bit more cookies every month. Do you know how much Americans really spend a month on subscriptions? Most people think it's about $80, but in reality, it's like around $200. That's right. You could be wasting hundreds of dollars each month on subscriptions that you don't even know about. But if you get Truebill, this app shows all of your subscriptions in one place, and it cancels for what you do not need. It cancels the one that you do not need. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions that you didn't even know you were paying for. You may even find out you've been double charged for one subscription. And to cancel a subscription, all you have to do is press cancel, and Rocket Money takes care of it for you. So you can cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com because seriously, you could save hundreds per year. You can get rid of the useless subscriptions with Rocket Money now. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. It is the best app that I've ever used to save money because I had some other apps or other subscriptions that were costing me money, and I need all my money. Shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen game to game. The NBA, every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA Eastern and Western Conference with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game from your favorite Locked On NBA team. It is available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, I left off with the 1995 draft. So let's go to 96. 96 is arguably the best draft in NBA history. You'd be hard-pressed to find a better draft. However, the top 2 picks combined for 11 All-Star appearances and 7 All-NBA selections. And all of those belong to Allen Iverson. Now, Marcus Camby was the second pick overall. Marcus Camby had a long career, had a very good career. I mean, he was one of the best rebounders and shot blockers in his time, but he did not make any All-Star appearances as a second pick. And he was selected over, listen to these names, Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash, Shareef Abdul-Rahim, Ray Allen, Stephon Marbury, Antoine Walker, Jermaine O'Neal, and Peja Stojakovic. Combined, they got about a gazillion All-Star appearances. Now, in a redraft, I'd say if you polled 100 people in a redraft, you take Kobe number 1 and Allen Iverson number 2. Steve Nash probably number 3 or Ray Allen number 3, depending on how you look at it. But Marcus Camby will probably not be a top 5 pick in a redraft if you did 1996 all over again. And 1997 was another class where the top 2 picks, and it was lopsided. You had Tim Duncan, 15 All-Star appearances, 15 All-NBA appearances, 5 titles, first ballot Hall of Famer, arguably one of the top 10 players of all time. And the second pick was Keith Van Horn, who combined for 0 All-Star appearances and 0 All-NBA, selections. If you did a redraft, you'd go Tim Duncan number 1 and Tracy McGrady number 2, who, even though McGrady's prime was cut short a little bit by injuries, is Hall of Famer. 7 All-Star appearances, 7-time All-NBA, scoring titles, and it's amazing in the sense that if you go back to 1997, Keith Van Horn was a great college player, went to the Final Four, and Tracy McGrady was really until till maybe like a few months before the draft was kind of unknown. Had a big performance in the AU camp, maybe the summer prior to it, and then he kind of rose up the draft boards. But this was at a time where, even though you had some success with Kobe, even though Kobe wasn't really Kobe at that time, you had a little bit of success and a little potential, flashes of potential that you saw with Garnett and Kobe. Teams were still a little bit hesitant to select guys out of high school, and T-Mac came along slowly, really showed some really strong flashes his last year in Toronto, then he blew up in Orlando. But T-Mac definitely had a much, much better career than Keith Van Horn. So, again, I've covered from 1990 to 1996. And the only number 2 picks that had careers that kind of lived up to the hype of their expectations being selected at high was Gary Payton, Alonzo Mourning, and Jason Kidd. And again, we had one draft where Joe Smith and McDyess combined for 1 All-Star appearances. All right, 1998 was another draft where the top 2 picks did not live up to the hype as far as accolades. Now, Mike Bibby was the second pick, and Mike had a good career. Mike went to conference finals. He was never an All-Star. He was a very solid, I'd say he was a high-level NBA starter, just a shade below All-Star. Michael Olowokandi, yeah, all right, we don't talk about that. But in a redraft, you have to go Dirk Nowitzki number 1, Paul Pierce number 2, maybe Vince Carter number 2, and then you'd say Dirk, Pierce, after that, maybe Antawn Jamison. Or Dirk, Pierce, Vince Carter, Antawn Jamison. None of those guys were the top 2 players in the draft. So 98 is one of these weird drafts where you have your first picks, number 1 and number 2, combined for 0 All-Star games and 0 All-NBA appearances. And again, sometimes there's still a big variance between Mike Bibby and Olowokandi, because like I said, Bibby was a high-level starter, while Olowokandi wasn't. 1999 was a class where I thought it was going to be one of the better classes at the time. And Elton Brand, his career got off to a crazy good start. I mean, he was 20-10 like his first 3 years. And he only had 2 All-Star appearances. Now, he was never the same after some of the injuries. Then you have Steve Francis, who was one of the better guards in that era. He went to 3 All-Star games. But combined, they only had 5 All-Star appearances and 1 All-NBA appearance. Now, if you want to do a redraft, and this is where it gets really interesting. I think this would be very debatable. If you do a redraft, who goes number 1 in 99 based off of their career? Do you go with Steve Francis? Do you go with Baron Davis, who had an All-NBA performance or All-NBA season? Rip Hamilton was a 3-time All-Star, was an NBA champion. Ron Artest was in that class. He had, he won an NBA championship, hit a big shot in the championship. He was an All-Star. He was All-NBA, one of the better defenders of the era. But you may have to say, if you do a redraft of 1999 based off of careers, Shawn Marion had the best career. 4 All-Star appearances, 2 All-NBA appearances, won a championship. How many of you would have thought, just off the top of your head, that Shawn Marion had the best career from the 1999 NBA draft? I know for me, I would have not guessed that. But when you look at the numbers, he has a strong case. All right, 2000 draft, Kenyon Martin, high-level starter, never an All-Star. Well, he was an All-Star one time. And then you have Stromile Swift, who seems to be more popular today because he got some of the most amazing dunks on YouTube, amazing highlight reel dunks. But that was about it. He was all flash, no substance. Didn't make any All-Star appearances. And the 2000 class was pretty weak. If you had to do a redraft of 2000, I mean, Kenyon Martin could possibly still go number 1. After that, Mike Miller, Jamal Crawford, Jamal McGlure had as many All-Star appearances as Kenyon Martin. I'd say if you had to do a redraft of the 2000 NBA draft based off of careers, Jamal Crawford had the longevity, so he might go number 1. Michael Redd, maybe? Mike Miller? Kenyon Martin? Very interesting class. Now, 2001 is a class that it has one of the bigger... one of the guys, when you think of bust, one of the guys that comes to mind, if you had your Mount Rushmore of busts, Kwame Brown is one of the names that comes to mind. I think there was definitely much worse busts from top 2 picks, but Kwame Brown had a long career. Kind of blew up on social media recently with his beef with Gilbert Arenas and then Steve Smith and so on. But Kwame Brown and Tyson Chandler went number 1 and number 2, and they combined for 1 All-Star appearance. Now, Tyson Chandler is carrying that 1 All-Star appearance. Chandler ended up having a long career, won a championship with the Mavs, won Defensive Player of the Year with the Knicks, if I'm not mistaken. But in a redraft, you got to go with Pau Gasol number 1. Maybe. If you don't go with Pau Gasol number 1, then you got to go with Tony Parker number 2. Tony Parker, 6 All-Star appearances, 4 times All-NBA, 5 championships. Gasol, same, 6 All-Star appearances, 4 times All-NBA. Gasol won multiple championships with the Lakers. It is a no-brainer that you got to go with Gasol or Parker. And depending on, who you like, those are your 2 guys. After that, I would say Joe Johnson and then maybe Zach Randolph. And then after that, maybe Tyson Chandler. But 2001 class was another class where your first and second pick did not have 2 of the best 5 careers in that class. Now, 2002, Yao Ming. Yao Ming's a Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, his career was limited due to injuries. But when he played, Yao was dominant. 8 All-Star appearances, 5 times All-NBA. The second pick was Jay Williams, whose career, unfortunately, was cut short from a motorcycle accident. But in a redraft, I'd say, based off of their careers, depending on how you view it, you may say Yao number 1 and Amari Stoudemire number 2. Amari came out of high school, went to 6 All-Star games, was like kind of like a revolutionary 4 or 5. He kind of was ahead of his time as a role man. And Amari was another guy that, man, if he didn't have the injuries, man, what could he have been? From the eye injuries to the knee. But when Amari was healthy, Amari was he was a special offensive talent. He was deadly from the elbows, and he was just your pick and pop, pick and roll threat. And man, I would love to see Amari in today's NBA. So that was a class. Again, the number 2 pick, due to injuries, number 1 and number 2, you did not have 2 All-Stars. 2003, now we all know about the 2003 class. LeBron James with number 1, and Darko Milicic, who's probably one of the most famous busts, if not the most famous bust in NBA history, went number 2. And Darko was drafted ahead of Carmelo Anthony, who went to 10 All-Star games, Dwayne Wade, who went to 3 All-Star games, and Chris Bosh, who went to 11. So in a redraft, I think most people would say LeBron and Wade. Some may say LeBron and Melo. But what is pretty surprising to me is that Chris Bosh made more All-Star games than Carmelo Anthony. Now, Carmelo had more All-NBA appearances. But, again, this is another draft where the first and second pick did not combine, where you did not have multiple All-Star appearances from two different players. So, now I'm going down the list. 2000, Stromile Swift, 0 All-Star appearances. Tyson Chandler, 2001, 0 All-Star appearances. Jay Williams, 2002, 0 All-Star appearances. Darko Milicic, 2003, 0 All-Star appearances. And then I'm going to go to number 2004, Emeka Okafor, 0 All-Star appearances. And the first pick in 2004 was Dwight Howard, who is, I think, a Hall of Famer. It's like he's played forever, but he just had like a very dominant 8-year window. And then it just kind of went a little bit downhill. Then he became a journeyman. How many remember Dwight played for the Hawks, the Hornets, the Wizards, the Sixers? What could have been? And it's still, despite the fact that it's like he just kind of fell off a cliff in a sense. And maybe it's because the game changed. Dwight Howard is still possibly a Hall of Famer, because the 8 years that he played, he was the most dominant defender. Now, in a redraft of 2004, I'd say Dwight still goes number 1, and then that's where it would probably get a little tricky, because you could say Luol Deng, Andre Iguodala. Deng had 2 All-Star appearances. Iguodala's still playing, multiple championships. Al Jefferson didn't make the All-Star team, but made All-NBA 1 year. So in a redraft, you may go Dwight Howard and Andre Iguodala, 1 and 2. All right, and last one before I go to break. 2005 was another class where the top 2 picks were nowhere near the best 2 players in the class. Andrew Bogut went number 1, and Marvin Williams went number 2. And those guys, neither were franchise guys, right? The top 2 players in that draft, without a doubt, Chris Paul and Deron Williams. And at one point, Chris Paul and Deron Williams were neck and neck. At least I thought they were neck and neck for the best point guard in the league outside of Steve Nash at that time. But when you look at it, Deron Williams only made 3 All-Star teams. And he made All-NBA only twice. And Chris Paul, 12 All-Star appearances, 11 All-NBA teams. I mean, his longevity and endurance and just how long he's been able to play at a high level has been crazy, considering that he's a small guard. But again, 2005, the top 2 picks combined for no All-Star games. All right. When we return, I have more information on my research, but I want to talk to you about Bet Online. That's because Bet Online is your number 1 source for football betting this season. You can find all of the latest developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, Bet Online remains your continued source for all of your sport wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and the easiest way to check on all your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net and use your mobile device to learn more. That is because Bet Online is where the game starts. All right, once again, this is Rafael Barlowe, Locked On NBA Big Board, or Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. I had a long night. My son didn't go to sleep. I don't know why. He just felt like he was missing something. Refused to go to sleep. So I'm a little exhausted. All right, let's talk about 2006. 2006, another class with the top 2 picks. We're not franchise guys. Andrea Bargnani didn't make an All-Star team, was never All-NBA. May have been a little bit ahead of his time. I think he would be like a really good player in today's NBA. But the best player from that class is LaMarcus Aldridge. LaMarcus Aldridge may be able to sneak into the Hall of Fame, maybe. He is like the best of the rest of the guys that are outside of the Hall of Fame. But LaMarcus Aldridge had a good career. He went to 7 All-Star games, was All-NBA 5 times. After that, you got Brandon Roy, whose career was cut short due to injuries. You got Rajon Rondo. You got Paul Millsaps. Millsaps went to 4 All-Star games. Rondo went to 4, won championship with Boston. Well, another one with LA. Has like the greatest championship picture with him and his son after the bubble championship. But Kyle Lowry could possibly have the second best career in the 2006 NBA draft class. And Lowry came on late in his career, but 6 All-Star appearances, won an NBA championship. Kyle Lowry could possibly be the second best player, maybe even the first from the 2006 class. And then 2007, we all know about 2007, Greg Oden and Kevin Durant. I'm a Blazers fan, so it's kind of a sore spot. I mean, what could have been with Kevin Durant and Brandon Roy on the same team? Oden, I don't even think he played 100 NBA games, and Durant, without a doubt, is the top player. I mean, he is a first ballot Hall of Famer, going to go down as one of the best scorers in NBA history. After that, in a redraft, you may say Al Horford, number 2. Mike Conley has had a long, steady career, who just got his first All-Star appearance recently. Then you got Joakim Noah, who had a pretty good run there. Maybe Marc Gasol is the second best player in the 2007 class. Won a championship with Toronto. Went to 3 All-Star games, All-NBA twice. Was Defensive Player of the Year. He was a throw-in in a trade for his brother. So again, 2007, we got a big difference between a guy that went to 12 All-Star games and a guy that went to 0. 2008 was a class that, man, if 2008 was just a class that I thought was going to be one of the best classes. And it had a tremendous start at the beginning. But unfortunately, the injuries to Derrick Rose kind of weakened the class a little bit as far as like numbers throughout their career. Because Derrick Rose only went to 3 All-Star games. Now, he won an MVP. Was the youngest MVP ever. And unfortunately, he just was never the same after tearing his ACL. Then he just had multiple injuries. But he's been able to be steady the last few years. And he's, it's 2022 going into 2023. So he's had a long career. Then there's Michael Beasley. Talent was never Mike's issue. Mike did not live up to the hype. I can say that I thought Mike had, outside of maybe Durant and Carmelo, the best freshman season that I can remember. I mean, he was dominant. It was like 26-13. I mean, he was just unbelievable from the short corner. And, I had a chance to talk with him a few years back, and he was fat then. And Mike just never lived up to his talent. And even now, Mike has NBA talent, but it's just some other factors outside of it. But in a redraft, based off of their careers, you'd have to say Russell Westbrook, number 1. He's won an MVP. I know he's not the most popular guy right now, but 9 All-Star appearances, 9 times All-NBA. There's no doubt that Russell Westbrook has had the best career from the 2008 class. I keep saying 20, and I want to say 2022. And then after that, Kevin Love, Roy Hibbert. Roy Hibbert. Who would have thought Roy Hibbert would have more All-Star appearances than Michael Beasley? DeAndre Jordan was a second-round pick. More All-Star appearances than Michael Beasley. Brooke Lopez, a better career than Michael Beasley. Who would have thought that? So again, 2008, another class where the top 2 picks were not the best players or did not have the best careers. And then there's 2009. Hasheem Thabeet, the biggest bust in NBA history. Somehow he does not get the attention. You may hear about Darko, you may hear about Anthony Bennett, but Hasheem Thabeet averaged like 3 points a game for his career. For his career as the number 2 pick, the biggest bust in NBA history. And he was selected over James Harden, who won MVP, 10-time All-Star, 7 times All-NBA. DeMarcus Cousins, 5-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA. And Steph Curry, who some people are saying is the greatest point guard of all time. Some people don't even think he's a point guard. But Curry, look at the numbers. You're surprised. 8 All-Star appearances, 8 times All-NBA. You think it's a little bit more, but he did have some injuries. But he's won multiple championships. He has totally revolutionized and changed the game. And Hasheem Thabeet was selected over him. Now, the first pick was Blake Griffin, who, in the words of Jay-Z, had a spark when he started. And Blake had a good career. Had some knee injuries, and it's just like he's very much a shell of himself right now. But Blake, in a redraft, Blake doesn't go number 1. In a redraft, you go Steph Curry number 1, and you go Harden number 2. Then Blake, but Hasheem Thabeet, awful. 2010, John Wall was the number 1 pick. Evan Turner was the number 2 pick. Evan Turner, no All-Star appearances. In a redraft, I would say, based off of their careers, you go Paul George number 1, John Wall number 2, and DeMarcus Cousins number 3. 2011, another class. Kyrie Irving, NBA Hall of Fame potential. I mean, one of the best players in the NBA. Even him, as great as his career has been, talent-wise, I mean, you could probably say he's a top 5 talent in the NBA. But 7 All-Star appearances, 3 times All-NBA, won a championship with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then there's Derrick Williams, who went number 2. Derrick Williams is out of the league, and he's been out of the league for a few years. In a redraft, I would say Kyrie number 1. No, you know what? In a redraft, Kyrie is not even guaranteed to go number 1. It is a big debate between, do you go with Kawhi Leonard number 1, do you go with Jimmy Butler number 1, or do you go with Klay Thompson number 1? But either way, Derrick Williams does not belong in that same class. Career fizzled out after a few years. And again, Derrick Williams. So let me go down the list. You got Beasley, Thabeet, Evan Turner, Derrick Williams, Marvin Williams, Emeka Okafor, Darko Milicic, Jay Williams, Kwame Brown, Stromile Swift, Keith Van Horn, Mike Bibby, Marcus Camby, Joe Smith. All of these guys were selected first or second and did not even make one NBA All-Star game. Roy Hibbert made more NBA All-Star teams than those guys combined. All right, 2012, Anthony Davis and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Huge difference in careers there. In a redraft, you'd probably say AD number 1. And after that, it's between maybe Dame Lillard, Bradley Beal, Draymond Green, and Chris Middleton have all had great careers after that. So I'd say in a redraft, the consensus would probably go AD number 1, Dame number 2, Bill number 3, and then Draymond Green, who was a second-round pick. So is Chris Middleton. But Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, who is not even 30 years old, and he is out of the league. So, again, another draft. So, from 2008 to 2012, the second pick, Kidd-Gilchrist, Derek Williams, Evan Turner, Hasheem Thabeet, and Michael Beasley. Nowhere near close to living up to their potential. 2013, famously known as the Anthony Bennett draft. Anthony Bennett is another guy that when you think of busts, his face comes up on the bust Mount Rushmore. And then the second pick was Victor Oladipo, who in a redraft does not go number 2 or number 3 or number 4, because in a redraft in 2013 was sneakily, if that's even a word, sneaky good class. It may not be good in depth, but the talent at the top, you got Giannis, one of the greatest players ever, and he's still super young. He's already been to 6 All-Star games, 6 times All-NBA, multiple MVPs, and he is an NBA champion. And then you got Rudy Gobert. Whether you like Rudy or not, Rudy is a Hall of Famer. Compare Rudy Gobert's career stats to Dikembe Mutombo's. Mutombo is an All-Star and a Hall of Famer. Gobert is neck and neck, and Gobert still has years to go. And then there's CJ McCollum. So the players that were selected 1 and 2 in 2013 NBA draft wouldn't even go 1 and 2, maybe not even in the top 5 in a redraft. 2014 was a big draft. a class where everyone was hyped coming into the season, or coming into that season, because it was the Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker. These two guys were thought to be the next NBA superstars. They had a head-to-head matchup, one of the few times where you get to see the projected 1 and number 2 picks meet up early in the college basketball season. And in a redraft, they don't go 1 and 2. In a redraft, you got to go with Embiid and Jokic, and you can pick and choose which one that you think is the better of the two. But Jabari Parker, again, another guy, 0 All-Star appearances, 0 All-NBA selections. Andrew Wiggins just had his first All-Star game. So combined, Wiggins and Parker, 1 All-Star game. 2015, Karl Anthony Towns goes number 1. D'Angelo Russell goes number 2. Ironically, they're teammates now. Towns has had a great career so far. Maybe not as far as wins and losses, but you can make a case and say Karl Anthony Towns is the greatest shooting big man in NBA history. I mean, his career numbers, when you look at it on paper, he's a better shooter than Dirk. I mean, he is a center, a 7-footer that is a threat to go 50-40 from the floor. Maybe not the 90, but 50-40 as a center. And it's not on like a small volume of attempts. But in a redraft, does Karl Anthony Towns go number 1? I'd say probably Devin Booker. 3 All-Star appearances, 1 All-NBA. Feel like he should have more. Went to the NBA Finals. I think Devin Booker's still underrated. Like, it seems like all the credit goes to Chris Paul with the Suns. But D'Angelo Russell, 1 All-Star appearance. He's still young. He still has time. But in a redraft, there's no way D'Angelo Russell is the second player in that draft. Russell has as many All-Star appearances as Kristaps Porzingis. All right, let's get down to the end. Guys are younger here, so 2016, Ben Simmons and Brandon Ingram. I think both of those guys have lived up to the hype. Both of those guys are, you imagine they're going to have multiple All-Star appearances going forward. So maybe some more All-NBA appearances. Ben Simmons, 3-time All-Star, 1-time All-NBA. Brandon Ingram, 1-time All-Star. But in a redraft, especially today with everything that's going on with Ben Simmons, does Ben Simmons go number 1? You can say Jaylen Brown could go number 1 in the redraft. Pascal Siakam has as many All-Star appearances as Brandon Ingram. DeJounte Murray, who was selected at the end of the first round, has as many All-Star appearances as Brandon Ingram. But the guy who has the second most All-Star appearances from the 2016 class is Domantas Sabonis. So in a redraft, do you go Jaylen Brown and Sabonis? Is this a class where the top 2 guys, Simmons and Ingram, may not go 1 and 2 in a redraft? Very interesting. Now, 2017 was a class that I was really high on. That was the first class for me, starting NBA Draft Junkies. You got Markelle Fultz went number 1. Lonzo Ball with number 2. Combined, they have 0 All-Star appearances, 0 All-NBA appearances. And combined, you can honestly say both have been disappointments. In a redraft, they definitely don't go 1 and 2. In a redraft, you're going Jason Tatum number 1, Donovan Mitchell number 2. If not Donovan Mitchell number 2, then you're going Bam Adebayo number 2. So this is another class, 2017, where the top 2 picks have not lived up to the hype. 2018, DeAndre Ayton went number 1, Marvin Bagley went number 2. Again, they're still young. They haven't made any All-Star appearances, and Ayton probably has the much better chance of the 2. But in a redraft, you're going Luka Doncic and Trae Young 1 and 2. There's no doubt about that. Luka Doncic and Trae Young have both led their teams to the conference finals. Luka has made All-NBA 3 times since 2018. Trae has made All-NBA once. This is a no-brainer. Again, another class where the number 1 and number 2 pick did not live up to the hype. 2019 is a class where you can say that the number 1 and number 2 pick in a redraft are, without a doubt, the 2 best players in their class, and that's Zion Williamson and Ja Morant. Only case that you can say has a chance to go above one of those guys, which is very, very rare or very crazy, but Darius Garland. Long-term, because Garland probably has the least injury histories, despite the fact that he was the one that missed his freshman year due to injuries, because Ja misses like 20 games a year, and his style of play, you have to wonder, is it good for longevity? Because he's such an aggressive downhill slasher. Zion missed the whole season, but I mean, combined, they all have 1 All-Star appearance. But in a redraft, you're going Zion and Ja Morant. 2020, Anthony Edwards and James Wiseman. Those were the top 2 players. I think in a redraft, you're definitely going Anthony Edwards or LaMelo. Or you go LaMelo number 1, Anthony Edwards. I don't think Wiseman, well, I'm almost certain Wiseman doesn't go 1 and 2 in a redraft. Now, 2021 is a class that everybody loves. Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green went number 1. You have to anticipate that those guys are going to be one of the few classes where the 1 or the first and the second pick live up to the hype and lead their franchises, just based off what we've seen after 1 year. But then there's Scotty Barnes, there's Evan Mobley. 2021 was a historic class. And then this year there's Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren, and we are already at the point where Chet Holmgren has missed or will miss his rookie year. So I said all that to say this. Everyone is hyped about Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson being the top 2 picks in the 2023 NBA draft. But the chances of both of them living up to the hype, being multi-time All-Stars, franchise guys, and leading their team to a championship is slim to none. How crazy is that? Well, thank you for your time for today. Thank you for making the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA podcast. The NBA season is here, and our local NBA experts and insiders have you covered on and off the court all season long. All the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, it's Rafael Barlowe. Hopefully everyone has a great week. NBA basketball is back. Stay tuned for great NBA insight from the Locked On NBA crew. But I am out. I got to get some rest because my son didn't sleep last night. Peace.